nervous presenter, so I tend to walk around a lot. So I apologize if it gets distracting because it looks like I'm gonna. Am I on? Sounds like it. How's that? Is that better? Oh, there we go. Excellent. How are you guys doing? Excellent. I've got my little clicker thing here. So I was working on this presentation, and it was actually an interesting little exercise for me. I was telling Dave that the program that we have, one of the exercises is you have to give a life-giving speech. And so I said, well, you know what, I need to kind of eat my own dog food a little bit. If I'm going to be the CEO of this organization, I need to start doing some of the exercises I'm expecting our customers to do. And so this is what I'll refer to as a minimum viable presentation. And that if it's a little bit bumpy, if it doesn't completely click, then you guys can ask me questions at the end and we'll fill in the gaps. The thing that I wanted to talk about today was a question that is really core to a lot of what we focus on with the company and also a lot of what's really important to me. And it's a really simple question, and it seems like, hey, yeah, I can answer that question. What do I really want? And it's interesting, and what I'm gonna do is I wanna use my story, my journey, what I've gone through as a bit of a framework for you guys to think about what it is that you really want. And hopefully this will be an opportunity for you to start kind of thinking about that in a different way and thinking about it in a way that will get you further in where you want to be, whether it's here at Google or it's someplace else. I think as part of the invitation, there was also an optional exercise that was called Eulogy and Epitaph. How many of you guys got a chance to read that? 1, 2, okay, you guys get called on, just so you know. So let's start off with this interesting quote. It says, as for those considering taking the time someday to plan their final weeks and months, 3 words of advice. Move it up. Now this was a gentleman. Anybody recognize that quote, first of all? Sound familiar? It's a guy named Eugene O'Kelly. Ringing any bells yet? No, not yet. Well, he's actually the CEO of KPMG, was the CEO of KPMG, was at KPMG for 30 years, and is an award-winning author. And why that is a compelling statement or quote is that he actually wrote that in a book called Chasing Daylight. He found out he had basically 3 months to live, had brain cancer, and he wrote a book about what it was that was really important to him. And so what I want to, as we go through this, I want to try and give that same kind of context, because what's really powerful for him, yet at the same time really unfortunate for him, was he gained a lot of clarity and focus and a real sense of urgency at the end of his life. And it was interesting. I was reading an article about Steve Jobs' book, just came out, and the person who wrote it said that the reason that Steve Jobs wanted to write the book was because he wanted to tell his children why he wasn't there. And that becomes for me, becomes a really poignant question, because I have a 2- and a 5-year-old. And it's also really important because it's, are you gonna wait till the last 100 days and look at it and say, okay, now I'm gonna cram everything that I really wanted into that last 100 days? Or are you going to start trying to do things now that will empower you to think about what it is that you really want? So when I was graduated from college in '93, so I was getting the tour from Veronica, and she was walking around talking about old school music, and I was kind of sad. I realized I'm now old school. So it was a little slightly depressing, but I tried to get my street cred up by naming rappers that were little unknown. Guru, anyone a Guru fan? Gifted, oh, nice, nice. That's how my wife and I met, actually. So, but it was interesting. When I got out of college, I wasn't really sure what it was that I wanted, but it was a lot about me. And so what I thought that I wanted, it's not me. This is actually a friend of mine, a really close friend of mine, John Soar and Mac Dog. Probably one of my best friends in the world. We lived together for a while. We were rock climbers, and we had an amazing time going on climbing trips together. Rock climbers? Yes, you all get called on too. But at that point, when I was asking that question, what do I really want? What I really wanted is I just wanted to go hang out with John and Mac Dog, and I wanted to go climbing, and I wanted to figure out, how I could have more fun in my life. And so I was a part-time rock climber and part-time startup guy, not starting things up, but working in startups, because apparently those were the only people who were going to actually let me go rock climb part-time and get paid some amount of money. And when I say startup, keep in mind in that time frame, startup was a dial-up startup. We were offering 14.4 dial-up service when you could actually do that. So it's weird, but it was that was a part of my life that was really important to me. But John, as amazing as he is, he moved away. He moved to Seattle and ultimately in New Zealand, and he's doing amazing things at Weta Studios, where he's doing, animation design for King Kong and iRobot and doing amazing things. And I had to ask myself that question again, what is it that I really want? And I had to reevaluate that. And at that time, my now wife and girlfriend, we were thinking about it, and we were saying, okay, well, what is it that we want? We're not, our friends, the lifestyle that we thought we were building is not there anymore. So how do we go about figuring that out again? And so at that time, that was in the late 90s, and I was like, I got an idea. I've been in startups. I'm going to go find a startup, and I'm going to get some of that IPO money, and I'm going to figure that out. And my plan was get rich and go climbing. And that was, my grand plan. Very, very thorough, deep thinking that I was doing at that moment in time. And I had actually planned it all out. I was going to find a company that, they were actually going to build a company that their whole exit strategy was that they were going to get bought out by somebody really soon. So I'd only have to work really hard for a couple of years, and then I'd get some of that IPO money. Well, that didn't really work out. I did end up working for an internet consultancy that I won't name, and I kind of had an IPO. It was more in the form of a severance package, and they asked me to leave. But I got a little bit of money. It wasn't anything that I was going to retire on, but it was a little bit to kind of make me pause and say, hey, I've got a little bit of an opportunity here. I got a little bit of space. What is it I really want? And that question over and over, you emphasize each word differently. You say, what do you really want? What do I really want? What do I really want? What do I really want? You start flipping those phrases over and over, and it starts meaning something different depending upon where you are in your life. But if you don't start asking yourself that question, then it becomes really difficult to even get on track. And what I found myself doing at this point was I was kind of like, man, I'm kind of meandering. I thought I was going to be climbing a lot. I thought at this point I'd have all the money that I needed and wanted, and I wouldn't have to worry about it. It wasn't what I really wanted. About that time, after I was offered my own personal IPO via severance package, the Lance Armstrong Foundation was in its early stages, and there were, I think, 10 employees at the Lance Armstrong Foundation. It was out of a house. I happen to know it was introduced because some of the board members of the internet consultancy I was at were also board members on the Lance Armstrong Foundation board. So I had a bit of an in. And it was also, the topic of cancer was something that was pretty important for me and my family, because my mother-in-law had been is a cancer survivor. She had breast cancer last year, had bladder cancer. Hopefully, when I didn't tell her I was going to do this, so hopefully if she sees this on YouTube, she won't be too annoyed at me. But she's an amazing woman, and she does some amazing things, and she's very much an inspiration for me. And so cancer was important not only because of her, but my grandfather, my grandmother, my aunt, all passed away from cancer. And so this was like, hey, that question, what do I really want? It's like, I want to make an impact. I want to have an opportunity to be able to impact people's lives. And so, you know, I think that was really a big part of what was motivating me. It was motivating me to say, what is it that I can do that's going to have an impact? Didn't have a lot of clarity around that. Didn't have really a lot of urgency. And the thing that happened with Livestrong, even though we put a lot of effort and energy into it, and we talked to a lot of people, and it was something that was really meaningful, at the end of the day, I did a quick search on Google Images, and this is what I found when I typed in Livestrong. And it at first it kind of made me sad, because I was looking at it and it was like, you know, it's awesome that you raised all this money, and you know, they have this amazing database of millions of potential people who can be advocates on their behalf. And it started, and I looked at it and I was like, man, was all that just about merchandising? Did I just kind of throw myself at something just so I could say that I was a participant in something like that? And then I started kind of digging through my own files and also digging online a little bit, and I couldn't find this image, but I did find this particular image, which there's a story that goes with this that is pretty powerful. Not this guy in particular, but what one in the early days of when we were selling the wristbands, and it got really crazy. We were selling like 100,000 wristbands, and you know, it seemed like we were paying more attention to whether or not we could get OS Commerce to actually handle the load, or whether or not it was about the people who we were supposedly doing this for. And this guy sent in a picture, and he, in these gang Gothic letters, put Livestrong across his back, similar to what this guy did. And it made me stop, and I was like, that's why I did it. I did it because this gives somebody an opportunity to express a perspective that they have, and allows them to connect. There's another interesting story that at one point I was, this is back in like 2004, I was in an airport, and very few people knew what the yellow wristband was, and quite honestly, we were looking at it going, yeah, Nike had come to us and say, hey, we're gonna make these 5 million wristbands and sell them, and we were like, sure, that seems like a ridiculous idea. And but when I was in an airport, there were two people who were at that airport who were wearing wristbands. They didn't know each other. And then they came over and they started talking to one another, and they started sharing their own stories. And it provided that opportunity for connection. And that, to me, was like, that's something that I really want. I want to see something like that. I want to have that ability to affect that kind of change. Not even necessarily change, but to affect that kind of relationship and connection in people's lives. And that worked out for a while. But then I kind of got antsy. And I tell my wife, and she agrees, we go in these 2-year cycles where it's like, hey, yeah, this is great. No, not satisfied. Need to kind of figure it out. Had to ask that question again. What is it that I really want? Well, by this time, I had my daughter, Lila, who my father refers to as Lila the Amazing, and my son, who is the antithesis, who is, his name is Boone, but he refuses to only use Boone, and he's just Boone Macon. And my favorite story, this is actually going to just turn into a story about family, but my favorite story is he got pushed. He's 2 years old, and he got pushed at school, and he turned around and looked at the kid, and he just got deadpan serious and goes, "Don't push Boone Macon." So apparently they wanted to make T-shirts out of it. It said, "Don't push Boone Macon." He's turned into like Napoleon Dynamite at age 2. But the point of that is that these people are enormously important to me. My family is enormously important to me. And I have to stop and ask that question, what do I really want? What is it that I want? And more importantly, how is that going to impact my children? And I have a tendency to think or want to think way over the horizon. And so I started asking that question, well, what's the world going to be like in 20 years for them? Is it going to look like it looks today? I don't know. So this is an important question, and since not everybody got a chance to go through and do the eulogy and epitaph exercise, I want to do this this exercise. I want everybody to just close your eyes for a second. We're just going to go through this, and I'm going to talk through a couple of things. But I want you to fast forward into the future a little bit and visualize that you're at a church or you're at a cemetery. It looks like your friends and family are gathered. If you take a closer look, it's actually your own funeral. The question that you should ask yourself is, who steps forward? Who's the first person to speak? Is it your wife, your girlfriend, your parents, your children? What is it that they're going to say about you? What is it that you want them to say? Now hold on to that and come back just a little bit. When you were there, you might have seen a gravestone, might have had your epitaph on it. What did you see? So you can open your eyes. I want to hear from you guys. What did you see? Be completely honest. Lived fully, loved openly. Who else? I'll call on people. People who raised their hand said that they got it, I'll call on. Who else? One more. Come on, one more. Awesome. Yeah. Who had trouble seeing anything? Yeah. Why do you think that is? No sense of urgency? No sense of, hey, I've got to pay attention to this? I think it's an important question to ask yourself. You have to stop and think whether you are 55 or whether you're 20. What are people going to say about you? You got to just, it's a basic question, but if you don't ask those kinds of questions of yourself, and they're simple questions, but they're hard. They're really hard questions. That's what's going to give you the power. One of the things that we talk about at our new venture is that we're about building the individual before we build the business. And that's one of the fundamental questions that you've got to ask yourself. What is it that you really want? And doing an exercise like that brings it into focus when you just sit down and you take an hour or so to ask that kind of profound question about where it is your life's going to be. And it sounds morbid, but it's also deeply freeing. So I did this exercise, and one of the things that I read to my children, and let's see if I can actually get it to work out for me. But other places you'll go, and I don't have it all here, but it starts out with congratulations. Today is your day. You're off to great places. You're off and away. You have brains in your head. You have shoes in your feet, and I can't see the rest, but hopefully you get the gist of it. Is that it's you've got an opportunity. You've got a grand journey ahead of you. And asking that question, what do you really want? And emphasizing those words. I asked that question right after I had left Livestrong, and I spent probably about 2 years trying to explore some kind of way that I could shape the future for my children. What is it going to look like in 20 years? And started talking to as many people as I could talk to. And I started thinking through all these ideas of how you can create this social impact and how you can create this fancy ecosystem of conscious consumers and social entrepreneurs and social venture capitalists who are going to come together and are going to, hey, this is going to be a utopia. And it was ambitious and probably substantially naive. But I did that, and it's the thinking of that that then led me to a couple of folks who I'd met. Actually, a friend of mine, Ed Perry, who then introduced me to another guy, Jeff Sandifer. If you guys don't know Jeff, he is the founder of the Acton Foundation for Entrepreneurial Excellence here in Austin, and they have the Acton MBA program, which if you haven't seen it, you should check it out. So it's a pretty amazing program, and that's where we spun off of. But as I was talking to these guys and I was showing them this, they were just kind of looking at me and I think kind of being really polite to me at the same time and just kind of shaking their heads. And I was, my question is like, where am I going to begin? I've got this big grandiose, okay, I've gone through thinking about what it is that I want, what I have people to say, but how am I going to get started? Where's that first step? And for me, that first step actually came with thinking about the individual. And I started thinking about it in this idea of entrepreneurship, not necessarily social entrepreneurship, because that has, a lot of people are very, fixated on what exactly that means and trying to define that and create this whole new kind of entrepreneurship. But for me, it started looking like, how can I start impacting the lives of people who are entrepreneurs or are going to be entrepreneurs? And what is it that I can do to provide them something that's going to accelerate where it is that they can be? They're not going to kind of meander around. And as Jeff put it, they're not going to make the same kind of mistakes. And so it starts with the individual, building the individual before building the business. And then the framework that we use and we think about, it's based on a framework that's from the MBA program called The Life of Meaning. And it's starting with the individual, what is it that you really want? Then layering in, what are the people around you? So if you think about on a day-to-day basis, who are the people around you that are really most important? And how do you do things to support and empower one another? And then finally, how are you going to start creating some action around that? What are those milestones in your life? What we do is we actually set it up so our program goes through and you talk to people. This is not a sales pitch, but it's a good exercise. Start talking to people who are 10, 20, 30, 40 years older than you. Start trying to understand, where are they? What regrets did they have? What did they do well? And what is it that you want to do, and where do you want to be? Just asking yourself that question, who am I going to interview? When I started doing that, that's a hard question. Because then I started saying, well, yeah, I'll interview this guy. No, I don't really want to interview that guy because he's not in the industry. Or I'll interview this guy. Not that guy. But you got to start. Time's precious. You've got to make sure that you don't waste the opportunity you have. And you guys, obviously working at Google, you're enormously intelligent individuals. Don't waste the time. Ask yourself, what is it that you really want? If you can ask yourself that fundamental question, you start moving down the path of getting to where you really want to be. So apparently we've got questions. Wow, that was a cheery ending, wasn't it?
So, thanks. Ooh, this is really loud. I'm going to lower this. Better?
Oh, we're sitting in chairs.
Oh, yeah,
okay.
Sure. Your watch right.
Are you Oprah or Phil Donahue?
Neither. You haven't seen my bank account. Okay, so if you still want to submit questions on the Dory, it's go/Randall Dory. So you can go there and submit questions. But we have some great questions here so far. If I can pull them up. Okay. What are the top 5 mistakes budding entrepreneurs make, in your opinion?
Top one, not asking the question, what do you really want? I think that sounds, hey, I created my presentation, saw the question. But it's, I think it's a lot about really trying to figure out where you're going to be and how you're going to get there, and making sure that if money's what you want, that's fine. But be honest with yourself that that's what you want. But try and think about what are the things that I can do, where do I want to be in my life, and how does that connect? If you can start connecting what you're passionate about, and the idea of identifying what are your, what's your calling, what is it that your unique gifts are that you do better than anybody else, what are you most passionate about, and then what's that need in the world that you can fulfill? If you can figure that, and I still struggle with that, but if you can figure that, the intersection of those pieces, that's something that becomes, I think, pretty powerful. And you start being able to then move forward in a very deliberate way, as opposed to being driven by what investors say or what employees say. And you start trying to give yourself some kind of a compass that allows you to move forward.
I do want to open it up because I'm sure that people have thought of questions as we move along, but the next question here I think is a good segue. So that's great and dandy, and you figured out what you want. But what if this, I call it the window, is passed? So what if you're, what about us old folks that are old school, and you have mortgages to pay, and you have children to feed, and you're like, well, I can't just take that risk and follow my dream now. What would your opinion be, or what advice would you give for that?
Yeah, I think that it goes back to beginning to just kind of explore it. I mean, I'm 40, so I qualify for the old school in my record collection apparently now, and I don't think that it's ever late. I mean, my dad, who was a Southern Baptist preacher and now is an entrepreneur himself, the cycle that he went through is he was in the military, he went and became a preacher, then he went to a startup, then he went to Fidelity Investments, and now he's got his own thing that he started 10 years ago. I don't think it's ever too late. I think it's about making sure you know what the end game, where it is that you want to be. If you can identify that, then I don't think it's ever too late.
Any questions in the audience?
Microphone here real quick, so we can get it on the YouTube channel.
Thanks. Are the kind of some of the answers that you're figuring out now, could you have come to those answers without those experiences you had as a 20-year-old rock climbing? Is that something, if you asked those questions earlier, would you have come to a different place?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know. I think that when I look at because there are questions that are still really valuable and important for me as well, but if you, I think it's about the intentionality. Part of what our mission is that we really want to inspire, equip, and connect purposeful and passionate entrepreneurs. And I think you can get there. I mean, there's tons of examples of people who have gotten there without the questions. And it's not like the questions are rocket science, but it's a matter of just sitting down and having that habit of asking yourself those questions. And that becomes enormously valuable in and of itself, especially if you start asking yourself those questions in conjunction with other people that are either potential business partners or close friends. You start thinking about, and the quality of those relationships start to change. And you start kind of asking yourself the questions that maybe there isn't a real sense of urgency around it. I mean, not everybody is Eugene O'Kelly. But if you start spending some of that time, it provides at least an accelerant. One of the guys who went through our program was actually telling Dave, and I use him because he's our kind of shining rock star, but he just opened up a business down in Westgate that it's called Treehouse. So you guys should go check it out. And Evan, that's like free. You get advertising right here. But he went through the program. This guy is wicked smart, I look up to him in a lot of ways. He was doing M&A, mergers and acquisitions at Citibank, and he decided he was going to go start something up. And while he was raising his Series A, he decided to go through our program because somebody recommended it. And the way he described it was rocket fuel. And I think that that's the way you've got to view everything. Is like whether it's our program or something else, you've got to ask yourself, where's that rocket fuel? Where am I going to find that material that's going to allow me to get there faster, sooner? Does that answer your question?
Good in the back.
What happens when you figure out what you really want to do, but it conflicts with what your family and friends want for you? And do you pursue that, or do you and sacrifice those relationships?
Wow. I don't know. That's a personal question. I think that you've got to ask them, those folks, what is it that they really want for you? And if that is, if it's something that you're passionate about, oh, that's a tough one. I've had the luxury of having highly supportive people, but I think that it may be a question of, can you go and start seeing, are there other people who share that same kind of passion, and are there ways of cultivating those kinds of relationships so that you can really ferret that out and and understand, well, why is it that they don't want it? Is it like my person who heads up my product development who decided to go to Kenya for the next 2 weeks? I don't know why she wanted to do that, but it's a passion of hers, and I didn't want her to do it, but it's something that she needed to do. So I'll cross your fingers she doesn't get kidnapped. Did that answer your question? Sorry. Okay.
You said something earlier that I'm going to kind of mix something you said with a question here. You said something earlier about asking someone 5 years older than you, 10 years older than you, 20 years older than you to see what they think. And I've heard something similar to that where when you were 5, if you're left to your own devices, you will surely kill yourself. And when you're 10 years later, when you're 15, if you ask yourself, were you an idiot when you were 5, you'd say yes. But the reality is at least half the decisions you make at 15, you probably wind up killing yourself too. And at 25, your target rate gets a little bit better. But when you ask yourself when you're 25, were you an idiot when you're 15? The answer is yes. So when you're 45, your 55-year-old says, which means you're an idiot now. So
that's my operating assumption on everything.
So the question here is,
I don't have the answers. That's the qualifier.
Well, you can look back, and the question is, what has been the most difficult lesson you've learned throughout the time you're working with different startups? And I would add to that and say, what do you think you're doing now that might be a mistake?
Oh, I think that wow. When I look back at the things and the startups that I worked at, I think that it was there were a lot of people who were really focused on getting rich, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with making money. Please do not ever interpret it that I think you should go into poverty in order to really find out what you want. But it ends up driving a lot of decisions, especially when you get into a situation where, when I was working at a company that was public and it was, they're an internet startup, the decisions became more about how do you make those quarterly numbers and less about what's the long-term value. And so those decisions get truncated, and a lot of times they start making, and I'm guilty of this as well, start making decisions that are good for what's going to happen in the next month, but horrible for what you're going to be doing in 2, 5, 10 years from now. And that's a big mistake. I think the mistake that, in terms of what we're doing right now, is I don't think you can ever get enough of talking to your customers. I think that the thing that we're probably haven't done an effective job yet is really understanding the deep, passionate needs of what our customers want. I think we've got a little bit, and we've got people who are excited about it, but we've got to know more. We've got to connect with people. So if anybody wants to participate in any kind of research effort, let me know. I'll sign you up.
So what did you learn from working with a guy like Lance Armstrong, and why did you leave Livestrong when, clearly it's doing really well?
Sure. Yeah. So I think that one of the biggest values of working with and around somebody like Lance, as well as a lot of the other folks who are at Livestrong, is that there's a constant sense of dissatisfaction that you aren't doing enough, you can do more, and that constantly pushes the boundaries. And it's nice to have that. And it also, that kind of particular business, because there is such urgency, because it's about people's lives, that becomes really poignant. I think the reason that I left the LAF was, I think it was more about when I started asking myself the question, what kind of impact can I have, and am I able to still contribute and make that impact at Livestrong, or had I kind of contributed what I was going to contribute? And I think that I contributed what I was going to contribute to that. Could I have stayed there longer? Probably, and done some other interesting things. Yeah, without a doubt. But I think that the stuff that I'm doing now energizes me as much, if not more, to think about, what is it that I can do to impact and bring what I saw as urgency in individuals who were cancer survivors, urgency that they had in their lives, and try and create that same kind of urgency for individuals who are entrepreneurs or becoming entrepreneurs. That gets me up in the morning and thinking about, hey, 20 years from now, am I potentially going to be planting a seed that my children are going to be able to benefit from? That's what's driving me more than anything else.
Okay, so I know a lot of us here are recently college graduates, and some people are further into their careers, but if you were where we are sitting right now, what would be the strongest piece of advice to give you that you sort of wish, whenever you were here, that someone gave you?
Well, first of all, you're probably light years ahead of where I was at that point, because I was rock climbing, and for the people who know rock climbers, they're not exactly the most ambitious folks. Really good and fun to hang out with, but I think that gracious, that's a big question. That's the biggest piece of advice. I think it's, don't be afraid to make mistakes and take risk. I was talking about my father, and the best piece of advice that he ever gave me was life's forgiving. And he's proof positive of that. He restarted what he was doing in his life so many times, and he's doing great. He loves what he's doing, and he's got a lot to show for that. But it was being able to take those risks, and I think you've got to sit down and assess. Along with that is a question of how well you can deal with ambiguity. You can probably deal with ambiguity a lot better when you're younger, but I'm trying to understand, how comfortable are you being in a place where nobody's telling you what you should be doing, and you've got to figure it out on your own. And getting to that point of comfort with that kind of ambiguity, then I think you become, whether you're at Google or you are somewhere starting your own, you become a lot more powerful and focused on how you can actually make an impact in whatever it is you want to do.
I'm going to take a question on Dory, and then we'll go back to the audience. You mentioned something that I really liked earlier. You said, build the individual before you build the business. And so this question kind of is similar to that. It says, what attributes do you look for in a partner? What's your feeling about partnerships versus going solo?
Partnerships versus going solo. It's funny. I actually asked that question of somebody yesterday that I was meeting with. Is that it becomes a question of with a partnership how. So part of what we do is when we're going out and we're trying to identify potential customers, we have kind of the direct to consumer, but then we're also partnering with universities. And part of what we're asking ourselves is, do they share that philosophy? If they don't care about the individual and they don't care really about building that individual, then that's probably not a good partnership. And so as long as it's something that allows us to stay focused on what our mission is and really creating those passionate and purposeful entrepreneurs, then I think we're more than open to that. But if it's not, then we have to probably take a pass. And we've passed, and we've actually fired customers because of that. So it's a hard one to do.
Well, I guess I have a two-part question. The first one being, I don't think maybe I was just hearing well. What is it that you really want, or are you still figuring it out at 40?
Yeah, I think what I really want is a world for my children that isn't caught up with the things that we're dealing with right now, like European debt crisis, or a world where people on Wall Street are calling each other and giggling about how they screwed a grandmother out of her pension. And that's a big chunk of why this new venture is, my bigger kind of 20-year desire is I want to change the business culture. I mean, I think Google does a good job of doing that as well. But I mean, there needs to be a systemic change how people think about what they're doing in business and how it impacts people. And that, people can define that as social entrepreneurship, but I think that that's just being a good person. And so that's what I really want.
Well, and I guess it helps that you said you wanted to change the world for your kids, but before you had kids, I guess what you really wanted would have been something else. So
absolutely.
What you just change 10, 15 years down the line and you realize you want something else, and how do you work with that?
Yeah, that's part of the when I was putting together this presentation, that was where I started realizing is that what I really want, it's going to change. Change is constant. You have to ask yourself constantly, am I doing what I really want? And is it getting me to where I want to be? As long as I can continue to say, well, at the end of my life, I want my children to say that I was there for them and that I did everything within my power to create a better world for them. If they say that, and what I'm doing today, I can see a kind of a line of sight, and I can see milestones getting to that, then I feel like I'm on the right track. But yeah, I mean, having kids provided a lot of clarity for me. I clearly didn't have that in my 20s. We'll say a good chunk of my 30s as well. But yeah, it's a hard question. Lots of hard questions.
We'll take another question here from the moderator. If you don't necessarily consider yourself to be a visionary entrepreneur, what are some of the ways to try and get involved with entrepreneurs trying to create a business plan or build a team?
Yeah, I think there's plenty of, I'm sure you guys know like Techstars and Startup Weekend and all the seed accelerators that are out there. Those seem to be kind of like the low-hanging fruit for everybody, and it's something that we've really struggled with because it's a question of, people can go there and get engaged and have this really coding marathon and do some pretty amazing stuff, but I think that when you start trying to figure out what kind of team, is something that I definitely struggle with too, is I'm trying to hire people, is making sure that there's a shared passion and a shared vision. And the way you can do that is by making sure that you kind of ask those folks, the partners and the team that you're working with, hey, is this all connect up with what everybody wants longer term. If it's everybody wants to just get rich, okay, great. But make sure everybody on the team really wants to get rich. Otherwise, people are going to get really annoyed and they're going to walk away, and you're going to have trouble keeping people together. But if you can have a shared vision of what that business is and that connects with what people really want, then I think that becomes a pretty powerful way of approaching it. And I think that, to a certain extent, the idea of being a visionary and that you have to be a visionary to be an entrepreneur is, I don't subscribe to that, because I'm far from being a visionary. And but I feel like that I could still classify myself as an entrepreneur.
You mentioned something earlier about you were showing your plan on a napkin, so to speak, and they looked at you like you were naive. And I'm hearing that consistently from entrepreneurs, where they say, well, that's part of the ingredients of making something successful. If you had to break it up in a pie, how much of it is luck, how much of it is you need capital, how much of it is education, how much of it is having to be naive? What would you break it into?
Wow. I'm not really good with math, so I may not come up with 100%. It may be a misshaped pie.
Let's do 1 to 10.
I think that, wow, what were the options again?
So
It's like a math problem, word
luck,
problem.
well, you can make up your pieces. So
I can make them up.
Luck, being naive, capital, being educated.
I think that a lot of it has to do, there's timing. I mean, people call it luck, but I think that you make your own luck. You constantly are trying to push forward, like the concept model that I had sketched up. Well, I think people could say, well, you were lucky that you were introduced to Jeff Sandifer because he's now funding this new venture that you're doing. And my argument would be, well, yeah, but I spent 3 years. I mean, I did that sketch in 2009, and I was thinking about it for a good year and a half before that. And it's, yeah, you're going to create your own luck. I think that it's more about putting some kind of stake in the ground and moving forward. One of the concepts you're asking about, like this idea of advice and being able to put that stake in the ground, the sense of ambiguity, and start moving forward and saying, yeah, it's going to change. It's going to have to change. I don't know what's going to happen. And really, saying, okay, I'll have to, move when it comes there. So I think a big part of it is just, say 50% is, having the right plan and team in place, and 50% is being comfortable with all of the ambiguity that comes along with that, and with all the people who tell you that it's not going to work and that you're too naive, and all the employees that tell you that you're not doing the right thing. So that's always fun.
What about the why behind? I mean, I think it's such an important question. What do you really want? And breaking it out like that's so powerful. But what about the why behind that question? How do you answer that? And then the second part is, who's your mentor now, or who are they, and how important is that been for you?
Yeah, I'm not sure I clearly understand, so I'll try the why question. But I think embedded in that question of what do you really want, it has to, there is a why in that. Because if you want to be interesting, we've been doing running ads, doing A/B testing on ads, and the people, one of the things that we were testing is like, we've got this message of, well, we can help you make money and be a successful entrepreneur, and we can also help you discover what you're passionate about. And we were like, well, passion, yeah, that's people want passion. So we started running these ads, and one of the test ads was discover your real passion. Another one was be a millionaire by 30. And we had this simple little quiz that we would send them to. And almost everybody, the vast majority of people clicked on millionaire by 30. But then the quiz was actually broken down so that the output would say, well, you really want to kind of discover your passion, or no, you're all about money, so you can do that. And what was interesting is everybody clicked on, I wanted to be a millionaire by 30 or 35, and then they answered this question, and 70% of them said, I want to follow my passion. And so I think the why, can say, I want to be a millionaire by 30, but, is that what you really want? Or is being the master of your own destiny what you really want? And so peeling back those layers and getting beyond just kind of the initial gut reaction is important. What was the other question? There was another one. Mentors. Yeah, I've got quite a few people who I would consider my mentors, and some of them are actually pretty close in age to me because they've done things that I wish that I was skilled and talented enough to be able to do. Evan is, I don't get a chance to talk to him as much, but he's a mentor in the sense that he's doing things that I wish I had the discipline that he has. And there's other people who are mentors, and I think a lot of the way that I look at it is I can't find that one mentor that does everything. And so I end up trying to take this design thinking approach to mentors where I'm going to get a multidiscipline panel of mentors. Get somebody over here who's really focused in design and design thinking, and somebody over here who's really much more about the spiritual aspects of it, and somebody over here who is a lot more the nuts and bolts and gets it done. I actually never really thought of it that way, but that's kind of the approach. I have a Frankenstein mentor that I go to different parts of him, depending upon what's going on.
Do you have any advice for the budding social entrepreneurs you work with in terms of balancing what they really want and then also with the needs of the communities they're working in? Like concrete advice in terms of how they could address that more.
Yeah, when you talk about the communities that they're working in, what do you mean by that?
Well, it seems like with social entrepreneurship, you're trying to have an impact on some community, right? And that's part of your goal. So, I mean, what advice do you give your budding social entrepreneurs in terms of finding out how to balance their passions and fitting that in with the needs in the communities that they're trying to impact?
Yeah, it's when probably about a year ago, we started going through the exercise of the standard exercise of the mission, vision, core values, those kinds of questions. And I totally got called to the carpet by Jeff, who's effectively the chairman of my organization. And he was like, I started, I was putting in my grandiose, hey, I'm going to create an ecosystem and I'm going to change the world. And he was like, yeah, that's cool. That doesn't really talk about your customers. And I think that's the question, because I don't view us as trying to create social entrepreneurs or trying to create some kind of social impact per se. I think we're more just, we want to have an impact on an individual's life and allow them to define what it is that they want to do. Everything is, we don't profess to have any kind of magical answer. And I think anybody who does is probably lying to you. And so you've got to go back and make sure that what you're doing, what you're passionate about, is actually connects with those people who are your customers, and that it's something that they really both need and want. And there's a delineation. That's one of the things we struggle with is, the need versus want question. Do people want money, or do they need, a mechanism and frameworks that allow them to become much more effective entrepreneurs?
I have a question. What are some of the books that have been, some of the books that have been most influential in your life in defining, I guess, both your personal life as well as defining what you really want and your passion?
I have to admit, I'm the slowest reader in the world, I'm pretty sure. I have tried to do the speed reading thing, and it inhibits my ability to really get through a lot of books. But like when you said that, first kind of one that jumped into my mind was Jonathan Livingston Seagull. It's just short, little, powerful, kind of inspirational piece. I think that Letters to a Young Poet are another one that I think has shaped the way I think about a lot of things. And I think so that's kind of the touchy-feely side. The one that actually was kind of turned on a light bulb for me, which we use in our program, is called E-Myth. It's by Michael Gerber, and it talks about this idea of, I don't want to give it away, but thinking about what it is what kind of entrepreneur you're going to be, and making sure you don't put yourself into a position where you are basically in a self-employment trap. And so I think that one, I was like, yeah, duh. But sometimes it's like the really simple things that you're like, wow, probably should have read that a long time ago.
We're out of time, so I'm going to ask one question off the Dory. And since I'm up here, I'm going to ad-lib it a little bit. You had mentioned the exercise, and you mentioned your goal was to make it better like your children, and you want to change it so that people aren't calling each other on Wall Street saying, oh, I screwed grandma out of the pension.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like greed, and you also mentioned how the bottom line, you don't want it to be money, essentially, effectively.
No, I think, I think it's important to say, and this is actually something that I've kind of come to a conclusion on over the past probably year or two, is like, I definitely, I think, was of this mindset of, yeah, social entrepreneurship, money shouldn't be your bottom line. That's just not, that's not realistic. And I think that it's important that if the idea of money being the only criteria by which you measure success, I think is very risky, because it's that's going to drive, if that's going to become more important, and that then creates the incentive structure for everybody in an entire organization. You know, we look at our core metrics, or what we pay attention to is both sales, because we can't stick around, otherwise we're just giving it away for free. We should just do that. But sales are really important, as well as what's the experience that our customers are having, and how are they telling us it's good or it sucks, and being able to understand those pieces. So since our mission is about really empowering those individuals, then we have to balance both of those, and it can't be one or the other.
Okay. Well, that was the question, because earlier you had also said that if money's what you really want, then that's okay. And I thought a little bit of contradiction, but
sure. Yeah. No. I mean, yeah. I think that and this is also important. Is this is my decision. This is the way that I'm viewing it, and that my perspective. But if you don't share that perspective, that's completely legitimate, and I shouldn't. I think it's way arrogant for me or for anybody else to say, well, since you only value money, you're a horrible person. That's not for me to say. I think that if I implied that, then that's wrong. I shouldn't have.
All right. Well, we're out of time. Thank you so much for
coming. Thanks, guys.